Everyone mocked him for living in a tree in freezing cold. What happened next shocked everyone. Fixing a leaky faucet, painting a wall, or mowing the lawn, John did it all. He liked the sense of accomplishment that came from finishing a job by himself. It made him feel independent and capable, even on days when the world seemed too busy or too fast. It was a crisp Saturday morning when John noticed the first sign of trouble. A heavy rainstorm had passed through the night before, leaving the world damp and quiet. The streets were slick with water, and small puddles formed on his front walkway. John went about his usual morning routine, making a cup of coffee and watching the news. That was when he saw it, a dark, damp spot spreading slowly along the ceiling of his living room. He frowned and walked closer. The water stain was small at first, just a thin line along the corner of the ceiling, but it had grown overnight. This was not just a minor drip. It was a sign that the roof, which had always been reliable, might have a serious problem. John sighed. Roof repairs were never fun, but he also knew that waiting could make things worse. Water could seep further into the structure, damage the wood, and cause mold. John had no intention of calling a contractor. He trusted himself to handle these kinds of problems, and he had the tools and skills to do it. Over the years, he had fixed plumbing issues, replaced old tiles, and even installed a small deck in his backyard. The idea of hiring someone to fix the roof felt unnecessary, not to mention expensive. Besides, there was a part of him that liked the challenge. The thought of climbing up to the roof, inspecting it, and fixing it himself gave him a sense of purpose. He put on his old work clothes, a pair of sturdy boots, and a baseball cap to keep the sun out of his eyes. He grabbed a toolbox that had been carefully organized over the years. Inside were nails, a hammer, a measuring tape, and a small assortment of roofing shingles he had kept from previous repairs. He even packed a flashlight, just in case the attic needed checking. John glanced around the quiet street as he carried his tools. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sidewalks, and birds chirped softly in the trees. It was a perfect day for a small repair, he thought, and he hoped it would be quick and uneventful. Climbing the ladder was always a little tense. John's heart rate increased slightly as he positioned it against the edge of the roof. He reminded himself to take it slow, to make sure each step was secure. Once he was on the roof, the view was familiar yet always a little thrilling. From up there he could see the entire neighborhood, rows of houses, neatly trimmed lawns, and the occasional dog running along the street. The wind brushed against his face, carrying the fresh scent of rain and earth. For a moment everything seemed peaceful. John moved carefully along the roof, inspecting the shingles one by one. His trained eye quickly spotted the problem area. One shingle was loose, slightly curled at the edge, allowing water to seep through. He knelt down, prying it gently with his hands and setting it aside. Beneath it, the wood was slightly damp but not rotten, which was a relief. He was just about to replace the shingle when he noticed something unusual. A strange smell lingered in the air, faint but unmistakable. At first, he thought it was just dampness from the rain, but the odor was different. Something musty and metallic, almost like something had been sitting for a long time. Curious, John decided to check the attic. He carefully moved to the hatch at the top of the ceiling, opened it, and shone his flashlight inside. The attic was dark and dusty, filled with old boxes, seasonal decorations, and forgotten furniture. Everything looked normal at first glance, but the smell seemed stronger here. John frowned and leaned closer. His flashlight beam fell on something that made his stomach twist. At first, he thought he saw an old piece of furniture, a large bundle of blankets perhaps. But then he realized it moved slightly. John froze. His heart began to race and his hands gripped the flashlight tightly. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. Someone or something was in the attic with him. Panic bubbled up in his chest, but he forced himself to think clearly. He reminded himself that it could be a raccoon or some other animal that had found its way inside. That explanation seemed plausible, though the shape didn't look quite right. He took a deep breath and carefully stepped closer, keeping the flashlight steady. As he peered into the shadows, he saw a face. A human face. It was pale and smudged with dirt, and the eyes were closed. His heart stopped. John had never expected anything like this. He immediately thought about the possibilities. Had someone been hiding in his attic for days? Was it an accident? Could the person be hurt? John's mind raced. He wanted to react to help, but he also knew he had to be careful. He slowly lowered himself to the edge of the attic entrance, trying not to startle the person. The man inside appeared unconscious, but he was breathing faintly. John could see that his clothes were torn and dirty, and there were marks on his arms as if he had struggled. The reality of the situation hit John hard. This was no animal. This was a person in serious trouble, and he was the first one to notice. For a moment, John considered calling a neighbor for help, but the situation felt urgent, and he knew he needed to act immediately. He reached for his phone, hands trembling slightly, and dialed 911. While waiting for the dispatcher to answer, he glanced back at the street, hoping someone would notice something unusual. The neighborhood was quiet. Everything seemed normal outside, but up here in the attic, his ordinary day had turned into a crisis. As the dispatcher answered, John tried to explain the situation calmly, despite the rapid pounding of his heart. He described the man, his position, and the weak breathing. The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional, giving him step-by-step instructions on how to keep the man safe until help arrived. John listened carefully, nodding to himself even though she could not see him. He was ready to follow every instruction, no matter how small, to ensure the man's survival. Minutes felt like hours as John stayed by the man's side. He tried gently to adjust his position, making sure he could breathe more easily. He spoke softly, reassuring him, hoping the sound of a human voice would provide comfort. His hands were careful, steady, though slightly shaking. It was a delicate balance. Any sudden movement could make things worse. While he waited, John reflected on the strangeness of the day. Just hours ago, he had been enjoying his quiet Saturday, sipping coffee and planning a simple repair. Now he was faced with a situation he never could have imagined. The reality of life, he thought, was sometimes stranger than fiction. People could end up in unexpected places for reasons no one could fully understand. And sometimes, ordinary citizens like him had to make extraordinary decisions in the blink of an eye. The sound of sirens in the distance was a relief. John felt a wave of gratitude, knowing trained professionals were on their way. He stayed with the man, holding his hand lightly, speaking softly, and making sure he remained conscious. When the firefighters arrived, John carefully stepped back, letting them take over. He watched, both anxious and relieved, as they maneuvered the man out of the attic with precision and care. For John, the event left him shaken but also strangely exhilarated. He had started the day thinking he would simply fix a roof, yet he had stumbled into a real-life emergency. It was a reminder of how quickly life could change and how small actions, like noticing a leak, could have profound consequences. Even after the man was safely taken to the ambulance, John remained on the roof for a moment, staring at the sky. The morning sun had risen higher, and the neighborhood had returned to its calm, everyday rhythm. Nothing looked out of place from the street, but for John, nothing would feel ordinary again. He had seen how fragile life could be, how quickly things could spiral, and how important it was to stay alert, compassionate, and ready to act when needed. As he climbed down from the roof, John felt a mixture of relief and contemplation. The day that had begun as any other had become unforgettable. He knew he would remember it for the rest of his life, not for the roof repair itself, but for what he had discovered, and for the knowledge that one person's awareness and courage could make all the difference. John's hands were still trembling as he stepped back from the attic. Entrance, but he knew he could not leave the man alone. The first shock of seeing someone trapped had passed, but now a heavier sense of responsibility weighed on him. He stared down at the unconscious man, trying to make sense of how anyone could end up in his attic without him noticing. The thought made him shiver slightly. How long had the man been there? And why had no one seen him before? As he looked closer, John noticed details he had missed at first. The man's clothes were torn in several places, and his shoes were caked in mud, as if he had been walking through wet or uneven ground. His skin was pale, and there were small cuts and scrapes on his arms and face. A backpack, worn and slightly torn, lay near him. The sight made John's stomach tighten. This was not a simple accident. The man had clearly been struggling, trying to survive in difficult circumstances. John crouched down, careful not to startle him. He gently checked for breathing, feeling the rise and fall of the man's chest. Each breath was shallow, but it was there. That small, fragile sign of life gave John some relief, though his worry remained. He whispered softly, "You're going to be okay. Help is on the way." His voice was steady, but inside he felt a whirlwind of fear and uncertainty. The dispatcher on the other end of the line had instructed John to stay calm and to keep the man awake as best as he could. "Talk to him," she said, "but don't move him unless absolutely necessary. Stay where you are and give me updates." John nodded, even though she could not see him, and focused on following the instructions. He asked the man simple questions, speaking clearly and slowly. "Can you hear me? What's your name?" There was no response. The man's eyes remained closed and his body seemed limp. John's mind raced. He remembered reading about situations like this in the news, people trapped in attics, basements, or other hidden spaces. Sometimes it was an accident, sometimes people were hiding. But he had never expected it to happen in his own home. He began trying to gently shift the man's position, just enough to make him comfortable without causing injury. It was a delicate balance, and every movement required careful thought. While he waited for professional help, John's eyes wandered around the attic. It was filled with dusty boxes, old holiday decorations, and furniture that had not been touched in years. Cobwebs hung from the corners, and the smell of dust mixed with the mustiness of rainwater. But amid the ordinary items, the presence of the man made everything feel urgent and tense. The quiet space, which had always seemed peaceful, now felt like a place of danger and mystery. John wondered how the man had gotten there. The attic hatch was small and heavy. It was not easy to open without assistance. Had the man been hiding for days, or had he been trapped accidentally? Each possibility made John feel a mix of anger, concern, and sadness. He wanted to help, but he also wished that no one would ever have to find themselves in such a terrifying situation. Time seemed to stretch. Every minute felt long as John waited for the sound of sirens. He tried to keep himself busy, moving around cautiously to clear some of the clutter near the man. He checked the backpack, which was heavy and worn, but he avoided touching anything personal inside. There were a few water bottles and some old clothing, but nothing that explained why the man had been in the attic. The mystery only made the situation more unsettling. Despite the tension, John spoke calmly, trying to reassure the man with his voice. "You're safe now." "I'm here to help," he said. He repeated the words several times, hoping that even if the man was unconscious, hearing a human voice would help. He glanced at the faint shadows created by his flashlight and realized how fragile life could be. A small misstep, a single moment of misfortune, could leave someone trapped and alone, forgotten in the shadows. John's thoughts drifted to his neighbors. They were friendly people, always exchanging greetings and smiles. He wondered if any of them had noticed unusual activity around his house. But Maplewood Drive was quiet today, just like it always was on Saturday mornings. The only sounds were the distant hum of cars on the main road and the occasional chirp of a bird. Outside, life continued as usual, unaware of the crisis unfolding in one ordinary attic. As he waited, John noticed that the man began to stir slightly. His fingers twitched and his eyes fluttered open. Relief surged through John, but he remained cautious. He knelt closer, speaking gently. "You're okay, help is coming." The man blinked, confusion clouding his gaze. He tried to speak, but only managed a weak whisper, barely audible. John leaned closer to hear him. Trapped," the man muttered. The words made John's heart tighten. Trapped. That was exactly what he had feared. He could see the strain on the man's face, the fear and exhaustion that must have built up over hours or even days. It was hard to imagine the terror of being stuck in a dark, confined space with no way out. John felt a surge of empathy, realizing that this was a human being in desperate need of help and comfort. He gently tried to ask questions, keeping his tone soft. "How long have you been here? Can you tell me what happened?" The man shook his head slightly, unable to answer. His voice was too weak, his body too exhausted. John realized that waiting for help was the only option. He could provide comfort, but he could not fix the situation alone. Minutes later, he heard the distant sound of sirens. John's heart leapt. He waved his arms and shouted toward the street, hoping the first responders could locate the house quickly. The sound grew louder, and soon flashing lights appeared through the trees. Relief washed over John, though he remained focused on the man in the attic. He had to stay present, calm, and careful. The firefighters arrived in a blur of movement and efficiency. They carried equipment, ladders, and medical supplies. John quickly explained the situation, pointing to the man and describing what he had observed. The team nodded, taking control of the scene with practiced precision. They instructed John to step back and allowed them to approach the attic carefully. John watched, tense but hopeful, as the firefighters worked together. They communicated clearly, each member knowing their role. Some stabilized the man's body, while others prepared to lift him safely. John felt a mixture of awe and gratitude. He realized that, although he had been the first to discover the man, the trained team was necessary to ensure his safety. As they carefully maneuvered the man out of the attic, John stayed close, offering words of encouragement. "You're safe now. You're going to be okay," he said repeatedly. The man's eyes, though weak, showed recognition and relief. John felt a deep sense of accomplishment, but also exhaustion. The adrenaline that had carried him through the discovery was beginning to fade, leaving him physically and emotionally drained. After the man was safely placed on a stretcher and taken to the ambulance, John remained on the roof for a few moments, staring at the empty space that had held so much tension and fear. The attic, which had once seemed ordinary, now felt like a place of mystery and danger. He realized that life was fragile, unpredictable, and often surprising. A simple Saturday morning repair had turned into an event he would never forget. John climbed down the ladder carefully, his legs slightly wobbly from the tension and excitement. On the ground, he watched as the ambulance drove away, sirens fading into the distance. Neighbors, curious about the commotion, began to gather. John explained briefly, careful not to reveal too much about the man's condition. The community responded with concern and support, offering words of comfort and gratitude for his quick thinking. The experience left John reflective. He thought about the small moments that could change everything: the decision to check the roof, the noticing of a strange smell, the choice to act quickly. Life, he realized, was often about awareness, courage, and compassion. Even ordinary people, living ordinary lives, could face extraordinary situations that tested their character and humanity. As the day progressed, John returned inside, cleaning up the area and ensuring the roof repair could continue once the crisis was fully resolved. But his mind kept returning to the man in the attic, the fear, the struggle, and the relief of knowing he was safe. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, realizing that even simple actions like noticing a leak or responding with care could save a life. By the time evening came, John sat quietly on his porch, sipping a cup of tea. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the neighborhood. Life had returned to its ordinary rhythm, but for John, nothing would feel quite ordinary again. The memory of the morning's events would stay with him forever, a reminder of how quickly life could change, and how courage, compassion, and quick thinking could make all the difference in the world. After the ambulance had driven away, John felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Relief because the man had been taken to the hospital safely, and unease because the full story of how he ended up in John's attic remained a mystery. John sat on his porch for a while, trying to calm his racing thoughts. The quiet evening was a stark contrast to the chaos of the morning, but he knew that what had happened would stay with him for a long time. Later that afternoon, John decided to finish the small repair on his roof. It was not easy to focus, though. Every time he climbed the ladder or handled a shingle, his mind drifted back to the man. Who was he? How had he gotten into the attic? Was he okay now? The questions seemed endless, and the answers were beyond John's reach. Still, he knew he had to finish what he started. As he worked, John noticed how careful he had to be. The roof was still damp from the morning rain, and every step required precision. He moved slowly, mindful not to lose his balance. The physical effort helped distract him, giving him something concrete to focus on while the events of the morning replayed in his mind. He replaced the damaged shingle carefully and sealed the area, hoping this would prevent future leaks. The work, though simple, felt symbolic, a small act of repair in a world that sometimes seemed fragile and unpredictable. John's thoughts kept returning to the man. He imagined what it must have been like to be trapped in the attic, alone and frightened. The thought made his chest tighten. The man had likely been hiding or had accidentally become stuck for hours, maybe even days. John wondered about the fear and confusion he must have felt. It was hard to imagine being in a situation so helpless, and John felt a deep sense of empathy. He realized that life could change in an instant, and that ordinary days could become extraordinary through no fault of our own. Later in the day, John received a call from the local hospital. A nurse asked for his name and confirmed that he had called 911 earlier. John listened carefully as she explained that the man had been checked over and was now stable. The hospital staff were running tests to ensure there were no hidden injuries or complications. Hearing this, John felt a wave of relief wash over him. The man was alive and he was getting care. The worry that had weighed so heavily on John's mind began to ease slightly, though curiosity about the man's story remained. As evening fell, John sat in his living room, thinking about everything that had happened. He realized that this experience had changed him in subtle ways. He had always considered himself practical and cautious, but now he understood the importance of quick thinking in unexpected situations. It wasn't just about fixing a roof or handling a home repair. It was about paying attention, noticing small details, and acting when it mattered most. The following morning, John received another call, this time from the local police department. An officer introduced himself and asked John to come in to give a statement about the incident. John agreed, curious to understand more about the situation. He drove to the station, still feeling the weight of the previous day's events. The streets looked normal, calm, and familiar, but John knew that something extraordinary had happened in his own home. At the police station, John recounted the events as clearly as he could. He described noticing the leak, climbing onto the roof, finding the strange smell, and discovering the man in the attic. The officers listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions about the man's appearance and condition. John did his best to remember every detail: the man's clothing, the cuts on his arms, the small backpack, and the weak breathing. He realized that even small details could help authorities understand how the man ended up in his attic. The officers thanked John for his calm and quick action. They explained that situations like this could sometimes be more serious than they appeared. People might hide in abandoned spaces, get trapped accidentally, or even be victims of unfortunate circumstances. John nodded, feeling a mix of pride and humility. He had acted quickly, but he had also been lucky that professional help had arrived promptly. After leaving the station, John stopped by the local coffee shop. He needed a moment to reflect and regain a sense of normalcy. As he sipped his coffee, he thought about how fragile life could be. The man in his attic had been in danger, and John had been the first person to notice. It was a reminder that ordinary people sometimes play extraordinary roles in moments of crisis. He realized that his actions, though small in the grand scheme, had made a real difference. When he returned home, John decided to check the attic once more. The firefighters had cleaned up the area, removing debris and ensuring that the space was safe. As he stood in the quiet, empty attic, he imagined the fear and struggle the man must have felt. The space that had seemed so ordinary before now felt significant, filled with the memory of the life he had encountered. John felt a sense of connection to the man, even though they had never truly met. John's neighbors began to notice his thoughtful demeanor. Some stopped by to ask how he was doing, and John shared a careful, simple version of the story, focusing on the rescue and the man's safety. The community responded with admiration, expressing how impressed they were by his calmness and bravery. John felt a sense of pride, but also a renewed understanding of how important it was to notice the small details in everyday life. Over the next few days, John found himself reflecting constantly. He thought about how life could be unpredictable and how small acts of observation could have profound consequences. He realized that courage wasn't always about grand gestures. It could be as simple as noticing a leak, checking an attic, and acting with care and thoughtfulness. The experience had given him a new perspective on responsibility, empathy, and human connection. John also considered how lucky he had been. The man in his attic had survived, but what if help had been delayed? The thought made him realize how fragile life could be and how important it was to be vigilant, even in ordinary moments. He decided to make small changes in his home, ensuring that all areas were secure and safe. He checked locks, reinforced doors, and cleaned the attic, making sure there would be no similar surprises in the future. As the week progressed, John continued to follow updates about the man. He learned that the hospital staff had been thorough and that the man was recovering well. The details were sparse, but it was enough to bring John a sense of closure and peace. He thought about how fortunate he was to have been in the right place at the right time and to have had the courage and presence of mind to act. The experience left a lasting impression on John. He realized that life could change in an instant, and that ordinary days might hide extraordinary events. He began to pay more attention to his surroundings, noticing small details that he might have previously overlooked. The world, he realized, was full of hidden stories, struggles, and moments that required empathy and awareness. Even as he returned to his normal routines, John carried the lessons of that day with him. He continued to work around his home, maintaining the repairs, tending the garden, and going about his daily life. But he did so with a heightened sense of attentiveness and care. Each small action, he realized, could make a difference, not just for himself but for others. One evening, John sat on his porch again, looking at the quiet neighborhood. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Life seemed calm and ordinary, yet John knew that extraordinary events could happen at any moment. He felt grateful for his own safety, for the man's survival, and for the ability to act when it mattered most. The thought returned to him that courage and empathy were not always visible. They often manifested in quiet, unnoticed ways. John had been the first to notice the man in the attic, and that observation had changed the course of a life. He felt humbled and inspired by the experience, understanding that ordinary people could rise to extraordinary occasions when faced with unexpected challenges. By the end of the week, John had resumed his daily life, but he carried a deeper awareness of the world around him. He understood that life was precious and fragile, that every moment mattered, and that small acts of attention and care could save lives. The memory of the man in his attic remained vivid, a constant reminder of the impact one person's actions could have. Even though the events had been frightening and exhausting, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced an unexpected situation and had acted with calmness and compassion. He realized that these qualities, though often overlooked, were essential in a world full of unpredictability. The experience had changed him, leaving him more aware, more empathetic, and more attuned to the needs of those around him. John knew that he would never forget the day he discovered the man in his attic. It was a story of fear, responsibility, and courage, but also of hope and humanity. It reminded him that life, no matter how ordinary it might seem, was full of moments that demanded attention, care, and compassion. And in those moments, ordinary people could do extraordinary things. The days following the rescue were unlike anything John Mitchell had ever experienced. Life in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Drive seemed calm on the surface, but for John, everything had shifted. The ordinary rhythm of his days, the morning coffee, checking the mailbox, tending to his garden, felt slightly different. Every sound, every shadow, even the faint creak of the attic, reminded him of the man who had been trapped just a few days earlier. John had gone through the motions of his daily life, yet his thoughts kept drifting back to the incident. He thought about the man's eyes, the pale and frightened expression, and the fragile way he had been clinging to life. He wondered about the man's story, about the hardships that might have led him to hide in an attic. John had been a witness to a moment that was beyond ordinary, and it left him with a deep sense of responsibility. He wanted to understand more, but the man was still recovering in the hospital, and privacy rules prevented John from knowing much. Despite this, John felt compelled to do something. He started by checking his own home with a new sense of awareness. Every window, every door, every hidden corner was inspected. He realized that while his house had always been safe, the incident had revealed how fragile even familiar places could be. Small things, like a loose shingle, a weak attic hatch, could turn into potential hazards. He reinforced the attic entrance, repaired the worn floorboards, and ensured that the house was secure. These tasks were simple, yet they gave him a feeling of control and preparedness that soothed some of the lingering anxiety. As he worked, John began to think about the man's survival. He imagined the fear of being trapped, the darkness, the uncertainty, and the physical discomfort. It was difficult to picture such vulnerability, even in someone he did not personally know. John realized that most people never experienced this kind of helplessness firsthand. Yet, it was a stark reminder of human fragility, and it deepened his empathy for those who faced unseen struggles in their lives. John's neighbors, aware of the story, approached him with curiosity and concern. Some offered kind words, others asked questions about the man and his condition. John shared a careful version of the story, emphasizing the rescue and the man's safety. He wanted to respect the man's privacy, but he also wanted to convey the importance of paying attention and acting when someone was in need. The community responded with admiration, and their supportive words provided John with comfort. He felt seen, appreciated, and validated, though he remained humble about his role in the event. During this period, John found himself reflecting on the broader meaning of what had happened. The experience had shaken him, but it had also taught him lessons about awareness, compassion, and human connection. He realized that even ordinary people, living ordinary lives, could have an extraordinary impact in critical moments. The story of the man in his attic became a reminder that small, thoughtful actions could make a profound difference. A week later, John received a call from the hospital. The man, whose name was revealed to be Michael, was awake and stable. He had mild dehydration and exhaustion, but no serious injuries. Hearing this news filled John with relief. He felt grateful that professional care had ensured Michael's recovery. John listened as the nurse described his condition and recovery process, taking comfort in knowing that the danger had passed. The thought of meeting Michael crossed John's mind, but he also understood that it would take time. He wanted the man to regain strength and stability before any interaction. In the meantime, John focused on his own life, returning to his hobbies, his home maintenance, and his daily routines. Yet, a sense of heightened awareness lingered. Every task, every movement, every observation carried new significance. Life felt precious, fragile, and unpredictable. One morning, John decided to visit a local community center. The events of the past week had inspired him to think about ways he could contribute to the lives of people in vulnerable situations. He signed up for volunteer activities that supported those experiencing homelessness or hardship. He wanted to do more than react to emergencies. He wanted to be part of prevention, support, and positive action. Volunteering provided him with a sense of purpose, a chance to turn a frightening experience into something meaningful. As he worked with the community, John often reflected on the man in his attic. He thought about the circumstances that might have led Michael to that place and time. He understood that life could be unpredictable, that people sometimes faced unimaginable difficulties, and that compassion and quick thinking could save lives. These reflections shaped his perspective, influencing how he approached his interactions, his decisions, and his outlook on life. John also noticed changes in himself. He was more observant of his surroundings, more considerate of strangers, and more willing to act when he saw someone in need. The experience had strengthened his empathy, and he found himself offering help in small ways, holding doors, assisting neighbors with chores, or simply listening when someone shared a concern. It was as if the events of that Saturday morning had opened his eyes to the quiet needs around him. Weeks later, John received an invitation from the hospital. They were arranging a meeting for individuals who had been involved in similar incidents, people who had helped someone in danger or contributed to a rescue. John agreed to attend. It was a chance to share his story, to connect with others who had experienced the intensity of life-altering moments, and to learn from their experiences. At the hospital, John met other volunteers, rescuers, and community members. They shared stories of courage, quick thinking, and empathy. John felt a sense of belonging and validation. He realized that, though the experience had been frightening, it had also connected him to a broader network of people committed to helping others. It reinforced his belief that ordinary actions, driven by awareness and care, could have extraordinary outcomes. Back home, John continued to maintain his house with renewed attention. Every repair, every small task became more meaningful. He approached his home not just as a place to live, but as a space where awareness, vigilance, and preparedness could prevent harm. The attic, once just a storage space, now carried a story of survival, courage, and human connection. John ensured it was safe, secure, and ready for ordinary use, but he also remembered the extraordinary events that had taken place there. John found comfort in simple routines. He tended his garden, cooked meals with care, and maintained his home with diligence. Yet there was a quiet awareness beneath every action, a recognition of life's fragility and the importance of vigilance. He reflected on the lessons learned, notice what others might overlook, act quickly when needed, and approach life with empathy and care. These principles became central to his daily life, shaping the way he interacted with others and approached challenges. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, John sat on his porch, sipping tea and watching the neighborhood. The quiet streets, the gentle breeze, and the peaceful surroundings provided a moment of reflection. He thought about Michael, hoping that he was fully recovering, safe, and finding his own path forward. John realized that while he might never know the full story, his actions had made a difference. That knowledge filled him with a deep sense of fulfillment and gratitude. The experience also changed how John saw his own life. He appreciated ordinary moments more, the warmth of the sun, the sound of birds, the laughter of neighbors' children. Life, he realized, was a collection of small, fleeting moments, and paying attention to them mattered. The attic incident had reminded him that one moment, one observation, one decision, could change lives forever. As weeks turned into months, John continued to live on Maplewood Drive, but he was no longer the same man who had climbed the roof that fateful Saturday. He had grown more aware, more compassionate, and more committed to helping others. His home remained a place of safety, his routines carried a sense of purpose, and his heart carried the lessons of courage, vigilance, and empathy. One afternoon, John received a brief note from Michael, delivered through the hospital. It was short, but it expressed gratitude, relief, and a simple acknowledgement. "Thank you for saving my life." Reading those words, John felt a deep emotional connection. Though they had never truly met, a bond had formed through a shared experience, one that had transformed both their lives. John kept the note on his kitchen counter, a quiet reminder of the extraordinary events hidden within ordinary life. It was a symbol of courage, human connection, and the unexpected ways people can impact each other's lives. He reflected on how quickly life could change, how small actions could make a profound difference, and how ordinary individuals could rise to extraordinary occasions. In the evenings, John often looked at the attic, now clean, safe, and ordinary once more. Yet he knew it would never feel ordinary again. It carried the memory of fear, discovery, and survival, a place that had tested courage and compassion. For John, it was a reminder that life's extraordinary moments often hide in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice, act, and care. The story of the man in the attic, the roof repair that revealed him, and the quick actions that saved a life became a quiet legend in John's neighborhood. People spoke of his calmness, his presence of mind, and his empathy. Yet John remained humble, understanding that it was a combination of awareness, timing, and courage that had made the difference. He simply knew that he had done what anyone should do: notice, act, and care. John continued to live with a deeper appreciation for life. Each day, each task, each interaction carried significance. He shared his story quietly with friends and neighbors, always emphasizing vigilance, empathy, and the power of small actions. Through the experience, he had learned that life could be fragile, unpredictable, and filled with extraordinary moments hidden within the ordinary. The attic, the roof repair, the frightened man, they had all become part of John's understanding of the world. Life, he realized, was full of unseen stories and quiet struggles. By paying attention, acting with care, and showing empathy, ordinary people could change lives in ways they never imagined. Even as time passed, John carried the lessons of that day in his heart. He lived with awareness, compassion, and a readiness to act. He knew that ordinary days could hide extraordinary events, and that ordinary people could rise to meet them. His life had been quietly transformed, not through grand gestures, but through awareness, courage, and the simple act of caring.